She had not cried in 23 years. Not when a teenager on a bridge begged her to give him one good reason. Not when a trucker pinned beneath his rig whispered his wife's name and then stopped whispering. Not when the line went dead on a woman who had swallowed a bottle of pills and changed her mind too late. 23 years of voices. 23 years of last words and first screams and the silence that always followed. And through every single one of them, Evelyn Mercer's eyes stayed dry. Her colleagues at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center had a name for her: the Wall. They said it with respect, mostly the way soldiers talk about the one in their unit who never flinches. They also said it with worry, the way you talk about a dam that has held back the river for so long, you forget what happens when it breaks. Evelyn sat in her cubicle at 3:14 in the morning, August in Phoenix, the desert air outside still holding the ghost of the day's heat, while the air conditioning inside turned the dispatch floor into something approaching winter. She wore a cardigan she had owned for 9 years and a headset that left a permanent crease above her left ear. On her desk beside a cold cup of coffee and a stack of incident reports sat a framed photograph turned face down. She had turned it face down 6 years ago. She had not turned it back up since. There was also a small glass jar filled with pebbles, smooth river stones, each one collected from the wash behind the house on Juniper Lane, gathered in the weeks after the funeral when she would drive there at 3 in the morning and walk the dry channel in the dark looking for something she could never name. She stopped collecting them after the 57th pebble. There was no reason for 57. It was simply the day she ran out of whatever energy had been driving her to that wash. The photograph was of a boy, 6 years old, brown hair that refused to stay combed, a smile that showed the gap where his front tooth had fallen out 3 days before the picture was taken. His name was Nolan James Mercer, and he had been dead for 23 years come July. The memory lived inside her like a second heartbeat. July 1996, monsoon season. The wash behind their house in Tempe had been dry for months, just a sandy channel where Nolan liked to dig for what he called dinosaur bones. Evelyn had been at work. Third shift, same as tonight. She had been on a call, a fender bender on the 101. Nothing serious when the rain started falling in the mountains east of the city, rain that nobody saw coming. Rain that turned dry washes into rivers in the time it took to finish a sentence. She did not hear about it from a caller. She heard about it from the dispatcher 2 cubicles over, whose police scanner had picked up a report of a child swept away in a flash flood in Tempe. Address 4417 Juniper Lane. Her address, her son. She remembered standing up, remembered the headset pulling tight against the cord, remembered the sound she made, not a scream exactly, more like the sound of something structural giving way, a beam cracking, a wall falling. She remembered hands on her shoulders, voices telling her to sit down, to breathe, to let someone else drive. She remembered none of the drive, just the arrival, just the red and blue lights reflecting off the standing water, just the firefighters in the wash with their flashlights cutting through the rain like desperate fingers reaching into the dark. They found Nolan's body 2 miles downstream, tangled in the roots of a Palo Verde tree. His fingers were still curled around a plastic dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus Rex. She had bought it for him at the dollar store 3 days before because he asked nicely, and because she could never say no to him, and because she thought they had all the time in the world. 23 years, 8,401 days. And on every single one of them, Evelyn Mercer came to work, put on her headset, answered the phone, and did not cry. Until tonight. 4 miles south and 40 feet below the surface of the city, the crying had started again. Not Evelyn's crying, not yet. This was a different kind of crying altogether. This was thin and desperate and young. This was the sound of a voice that had been crying for so long it had forgotten how to stop. And it was threading up through a rusted storm grate, like smoke escaping from a fire that nobody could see. Marcus Webb pressed his face against the metal bars and listened. He was 11 years old. He had the lean, wiry build of a boy who had learned to run before he learned to trust, in the watchful eyes of someone who had seen too many wrong things happen in the dark. His clothes were 3 sizes too big, salvaged from a donation bin behind a church on Camelback Road. His shoes were held together with duct tape in a kind of faith that even he did not fully understand. He had been sleeping under the 19th Avenue overpass for 6 weeks. Before that, the drainage culvert near Encanto Park. Before that, a bus shelter on Van Buren. Before that, a dozen places that blurred together like watercolors left in the rain. 2 years on the streets. 2 years since the fire. 730 days of learning the geography of abandonment. Which shelters had beds and which had waiting lists that never moved. Which churches gave food without sermons and which required you to sit through 2 hours of preaching before they handed you a sandwich. Which intersections had cops who would tell you to move along and which had cops who would take you back to a group home where the older kids stole your shoes while you slept. Marcus had learned all of it, had mapped the invisible city that existed beneath the one most people saw. The city of unlocked dumpsters and unguarded loading docks and underpasses where the concrete held the day's heat long enough to keep you alive through the coldest desert nights. He had become fluent in the language of survival, which was mostly a language of avoidance. Avoid eye contact, avoid confrontation, avoid attachment, avoid caring about anyone or anything that could be taken away from you. The memory came whether he wanted it or not. It always did. The smell of smoke, the screaming, the orange glow reflecting off the kitchen window of their apartment on 7th Street. His mother, Denise Webb, standing in the doorway in her nurse's scrubs, her face caught between terror and something else. Something fiercer. Something that looked like purpose. There were children in the building next door. A woman on the 2nd floor with 2 kids under 5. The fire had started in the wiring of the laundry room and raced up through the walls like it was alive, like it was hungry, and by the time the trucks arrived, the stairwell was an oven, and the woman was screaming from her window with a baby in each arm. Denise did not wait for the trucks. She did not wait for anyone. She pressed something into Marcus's palm, small and round and warm from her body heat. A copper transit token worn smooth by years of riding the bus to her shifts at the hospital. 2 words engraved on its face, words he could feel with his fingertips even in total darkness. I'll return. She kissed his forehead. She said his name like a prayer. And then she ran into the building. She got the children out, both of them, handed them through a window to a neighbor who had climbed a ladder. And then the ceiling came down, and the doorway collapsed, and Denise Webb, who had spent her entire life taking care of other people's pain, became the thing that other people mourned. Marcus had waited on the curb with the token in his fist while the firefighters poured water onto something that no longer resembled a building. Waited while social workers wrapped him in a blanket and said words like temporary placement and we will figure this out. Waited while the system processed him, shuffled him, lost him. Waited while foster homes came and went, each one worse than the last, until the day he decided that sleeping under a bridge was better than sleeping in a house where the locks were on the wrong side of the doors. I'll return. She had not returned, but the token remained hanging from a cord beneath his shirt, pressing against his chest with every breath. A compass that pointed towards something he could not name. A promise made by the only person who had ever kept her promises to him. 3:17 in the morning, August in Phoenix, the desert cold that nobody warned you about. The cold that seeps into your bones when the sun disappears and the concrete stops radiating and the city becomes a different animal altogether. Marcus had been half asleep when the crying started. At first he thought it was a cat, then a bird, then nothing at all, just the wind playing tricks through the drainage grates that lined the street like teeth in an old jaw. But then it came again, and it was not a cat, and it was not a bird, and it was not the wind. It was a voice, small, thin, desperate, the pitch of someone who had not yet learned to hide their fear because they had not yet learned that the world expected them to. Marcus knew the sound. He had made that sound himself in the early days before the streets taught him that crying brought attention and attention brought danger. He pressed his face against the grate and spoke into the darkness below. Hello? The crying stopped. One moment it was there, the next silence, complete and absolute, the kind of silence that makes you question whether you heard anything at all. Marcus pulled back. He should walk away. Every survival instinct he had cultivated over 2 years screamed at him to walk away. Do not get involved. Do not draw attention. Do not be the person who sticks their neck out for strangers because strangers will not stick their necks out for you. That was the law of the streets. That was the law that kept you alive. But his mother had broken that law. She had broken it on the night she died, running toward a fire instead of away from it, choosing 2 children she had never met over the son who needed her most. And Marcus had spent 2 years being angry about that choice, 2 years believing she had abandoned him, 2 years telling himself that caring about strangers was a weakness that would get you killed. And yet, the crying had sounded so young, so small, so completely, utterly alone. He looked at the grate, heavy, rusted, set into concrete that had cracked and shifted over decades of Arizona summers. He wrapped his fingers around the metal bars, braced his feet against the ground, and pulled. Nothing moved. He repositioned, bent his knees, pulled again. A screech of metal on stone. The grate shifted an inch, 2 inches, 3. The smell hit him first, rot and moisture and something chemical like cleaning fluid mixed with decay. The Phoenix storm drain system. 600 miles of tunnels beneath the city designed to carry flash floodwaters away from streets that would otherwise become rivers every monsoon season. They were engineering marvels when they were built. Now they were tombs. 17 deaths in the past decade, mostly homeless, mostly forgotten. Marcus knew the statistics because he had memorized them the same way he memorized which dumpsters, behind which restaurants, still had edible food on which nights of the week. He pulled the grate aside far enough to create an opening, looked down into darkness that swallowed the faint street wide before it could reach more than a few feet. His hand moved to his chest, the token pressed against his fingers through the thin fabric of his shirt, warm from his body, constant as a heartbeat. I'll return. Marcus lowered himself through the opening, hung for a moment by his fingertips over nothing, and let go. The impact jolted through his ankles, his knees, his spine. The water was colder than he expected. Ankle deep, thick with sediment that squelched between his toes and soaked through his shoes in an instant. The chill raced up his legs and settled in his chest like a fist closing around his lungs. He could not see. Not his hands, not the walls, not the ground beneath the water. Total darkness, the kind that has weight, the kind that presses against your eyes and convinces your brain that you have gone blind. The tunnel amplified every sound. The drip of water somewhere ahead. The scratch of claws as rats fled from this new intruder. The echo of his own breathing, too fast, too loud, too scared. And beneath it all, so faint, he almost missed it, a whimper. I am coming, he said to the darkness. I hear you. I am coming. The tunnel branched almost immediately, left or right. No way to know which direction led toward the sound. Marcus closed his eyes, which made no difference in the blackness, and listened with every part of himself. Not just his ears, his skin feeling for the faintest shift in air current, his feet sensing the direction of the water's flow, his chest where the tokens seemed to pulse like a second heart. Left. He moved forward, one hand trailing along the curved concrete wall, the other stretched ahead to feel for obstacles. The pipe was perhaps 4 feet in diameter, forcing him to walk hunched over his back, bent at an angle that began to ache within the first 100 feet. The water splashed with every step, each sound echoing ahead of him and behind him and above him, until the tunnel itself seemed alive with the noise of his progress. The whimper came again, closer. Or was it sound played tricks down here, bouncing off concrete, splitting at junctions, creating phantom voices that could lead you deeper into the maze until you were so turned around that even your own breathing seemed to come from the wrong direction? Marcus kept moving, one hand on the wall, one hand reaching forward, step by step through water that grew deeper as the tunnel descended, rising from his ankles to his shins to his knees. The cold was a living thing now, wrapping around his legs, climbing his body, stealing heat from his core with every passing second. The tunnel narrowed without warning. His outstretched hand hit concrete where there should have been air. He felt around the edges, found an opening barely 2 feet wide and perhaps 18 inches tall. Too small to walk through. Too small to even crouch through. He would have to crawl. He dropped to his hands and knees. The water soaked through his jeans, his shirt, everything. Cold enough to make his teeth chatter. Cold enough to make his fingers go numb. Cold enough to make the smart, rational, survival-trained part of his brain scream at him, to turn back, to climb out, to forget about the voice in the dark and save himself. The passage was barely wide enough for his shoulders. He had to turn sideways at one point, pressing his cheek against the concrete, feeling the water lap against the side of his face. Something brushed against his leg in the current. Something alive. He kicked at it and kept moving, kept pushing forward through a space that seemed to shrink with every foot he gained. His elbows scraped the ceiling. His knees found every jagged edge, every crack, every piece of debris that had washed into this narrowing and lodged itself like a trap. At one point, the water deepened suddenly. His hands plunged into it up to his forearms, and his face nearly touched the surface, and for one terrible second, he was breathing water instead of air. He coughed, gagged, lifted his head, and as high as the ceiling would allow, and kept crawling. He thought about his mother, running through a doorway framed in fire, not hesitating, not calculating, just going. Because someone needed her and she was there, and that was enough. Marcus crawled forward into the darkness. Time lost meaning. Without light, without landmarks, without any frame of reference, he could not tell if he had been crawling for minutes or hours. His knees were raw, scraped bloody by concrete that felt like sandpaper. His palms stung with cuts he could not see. His back was a continuous line of pain from the hunched position the tunnel demanded. The cold had seeped so deep into his body that he could no longer remember what warmth felt like. It was as if warmth was something he had read about in a book, something that happened to other people in other lives. But the sounds were getting closer. Not just the whimper now, a voice, small and thin and cracked, singing something that might have been a nursery rhyme. The words too distorted by echoes to make out, but the melody was unmistakable. A child's song, simple and repetitive, the kind you sing when you are scared and there is no one to sing it for you. A child. Definitely a child, younger than him from the sound of it. 4, maybe 5 years old. Marcus moved faster, ignoring the protest of his muscles. The raw sting of his palms, the cold that was trying to shut his body down, one system at a time. The tunnel branched again. Then again. Each junction forcing him to stop, to listen, to choose. He was following sound through a maze designed to confuse sound, and he knew with a cold certainty that if he made one wrong turn, he might never find his way back. The token bounced against his chest with every movement. I'll return. The pipe widened suddenly, opening into a chamber where 3 tunnels converged. Marcus pushed himself up from his hands and knees, his back screaming in relief, and looked around. Gray light, faint but real, filtering down from somewhere above. A grate 20 feet overhead set into what must have been a sidewalk or parking lot. The light was not sunlight, but streetlight, orange and dim, barely enough to paint shadows on the walls. But after the total darkness of the tunnels, it felt like sunrise. He saw the debris first. Part of the ceiling had collapsed at one end of the chamber, creating a pocket of broken concrete and twisted rebar and shattered pipe. Old damage from the look of it. Years, maybe decades. The kind of structural failure that cities ignore because fixing it costs money and nobody important ever comes down here to complain. Then he saw the girl. She was sitting in the debris pocket with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Blonde hair matted and dirty, pink sneakers caked with mud. A face that might have been bright and curious under other circumstances, but was now streaked with tears and grime, and the kind of exhaustion that goes beyond tiredness into something deeper. Something that looks like surrender. She was singing to herself, something about sunshine, something about happiness. Her voice cracked on the high notes, but she kept going the same few lines over and over like a spell against the darkness, like if she stopped singing, the dark would swallow her completely. Marcus took a step forward. The girl's eyes snapped open, wide and blue and terrified. They stared at each other across the dim chamber, the boy who had crawled through 2 miles of darkness and the girl who had been waiting in it for almost 2 days. The singing stopped. The silence that replaced it was enormous. Then Marcus said hi. The girl's lower lip trembled. Her chin quivered. Her whole body seemed to vibrate with the effort of not crying. Who are you? My name is Marcus. I heard you crying. I came to help. She studied him with the suspicious intensity that children develop when they have been disappointed too many times. Her eyes moved over his face, his ragged clothes, his bare feet, his hands that were scraped and bleeding from the crawl. She was looking for something. Danger, maybe? Or hope? Are you a ghost? She asked finally. Marcus almost laughed. No, I am real. Are you hurt? The girl shook her head, but her eyes filled with tears that she was too tired to hold back. I cannot get out. I tried and tried, but I cannot climb, and the water was scary, and nobody came. I yelled, and nobody came. The words tumbled out in a rush, 2 days of terror compressed into a single breath. Marcus moved closer slowly, the way you approach a frightened animal. What is your name? The girl sniffled. wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Lily, my name is Lily. That is a pretty name, Marcus said. He sat down on the rubble a few feet from her, close enough to be present, but far enough to give her the space that frightened children need. He had learned that in the shelters and the foster homes, in all the places where being too close, too fast could get you hurt. Lily watched him sit. Her body was shivering, not just from cold, but from the kind of sustained fear that turns muscles into something closer to wire. Her fingernails were caked with dirt from where she had tried to climb the walls. Her knees were scraped raw, and yet she was alive. 2 days underground, 4 years old and still alive, still singing. Marcus thought about that, about the kind of strength that lived inside a 4-year-old girl who could sit in absolute darkness for 2 days and not give up, who could keep singing when no one was listening, who could still ask questions instead of just crying. There was something in her that the darkness had not been able to touch, something that refused to go out. "How did you get down here?" Lily Marcus asked. The story came out in fragments. A puppy named Biscuit, a walk with her daddy in the neighborhood near a construction site. The fence was broken, and Biscuit ran through the gap, and Lily followed because Biscuit was her best friend, and she did not want him to be alone. There was a hole, a big one covered by a piece of plywood that looked solid but was not. She stepped on it, and it cracked, and the fall happened too fast to scream, and the landing knocked the breath from her body, and when she could breathe again, she was down here, and Biscuit was gone, and the light above was too far away, and nobody answered when she called. "How long have you been down here?" Marcus asked. Lily thought about it, her forehead creasing with the effort. "It was daytime when I fell. Then it got dark. Then light came through the holes up there. Then dark again. Then you came. At least 18 hours. Probably more. A 4-year-old child alone in the dark in a place designed to carry floodwater while a storm system built in the mountains to the east." "Okay," Lily Marcus said. "Here's what we are going to do. I am going to find a way to call for help. Then people are going to come and get us both out of here. Does that sound good?" Lily nodded, but her fingers reached out and caught the hem of his shirt. "Do not leave me, please. I do not want to be alone again." Marcus looked at her face, at the tear tracks cutting through the grime, at the fear that had not gone away, not completely, even now that someone had finally come. "I will not leave you," he said. "I promise." He meant it. Whatever happened next, whatever it cost, he was not going to break that promise. The token pressed against his chest. "I'll return." This time he would. The phone was half buried in silt 30 feet from where Lily sat. Marcus almost missed it. Just another piece of urban debris washed into the tunnels and forgotten. But something caught his eye, a glint of glass where glass should not be. He knelt and dug it out with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The case was waterlogged and swollen. When he pressed the power button, nothing happened. He tried again. Nothing. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on." He pressed and held. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. A flicker. A logo. The screen lit up with a battery icon. 3%. 3%. 4 minutes of power, maybe less. Maybe much less given the water damage and the cold in the cracked screen that was already flickering. Marcus looked at the grate above, looked at the phone, looked at Lily, who was watching him with eyes that had decided to trust him, even though trusting people had not worked out well for her recently. He moved to the spot directly beneath the grate and held the phone toward the opening, toward whatever signal might be leaking down from the world above. The indicator flickered. Searching. Searching. 1 bar. His fingers found the emergency call button. The phone rang once. Twice. "What is your emergency?" The voice was calm and professional and female. The voice of someone who had answered thousands of calls and had learned to keep the horror at arm's length. The voice of someone who had built a wall around herself and maintained it for 23 years. The voice of Evelyn Mercer. Marcus took a breath, and then he said 3 words that would shatter that wall like it was made of glass. "I can hear her." On the other end of the line in her cubicle at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center, Evelyn's hand froze on her keyboard. Something in the boy's voice, something in those 3 words. The phrasing, the certainty, the way he said her like the girl in the dark was already someone he had claimed a responsibility for, someone he had chosen to save. "I can hear her," and suddenly Evelyn was not in her cubicle anymore. She was standing in her kitchen on Juniper Lane, July 1996, and the rain was hammering the windows and her phone was ringing, and the voice on the other end was telling her that her son, her Nolan, was in the wash behind the house in the water, and she could not get to him because she was here in this building 10 miles away, answering someone else's emergency while her own emergency was drowning in muddy water 3 feet from his backyard swing set. She had not heard him. That was the thing that had haunted her for 23 years. She had not heard him crying, had not heard him calling for her, had been sitting in this exact chair wearing this exact headset while her 6-year-old son was swept away by water that moved faster than anyone could run. I can hear her, this boy, this voice on the phone. He had heard a child crying in the darkness, and instead of walking away, instead of doing the rational, sensible, self-preserving thing, he had gone down into the dark to find her. He had done what Evelyn could not do, what Evelyn had spent 23 years wishing she could have done. The other operators turned to stare, because Evelyn Mercer had removed her headset and pressed her hand against her mouth, and her shoulders were shaking, and there were tears streaming down her face. In 23 years, they had never seen Evelyn cry. Not once. The wall had cracked. The dam had broken. But Evelyn Mercer had not survived 23 years in this chair by letting her feelings run the show. She gave herself 3 seconds. 3 seconds to fall apart. 3 seconds to feel everything she had been refusing to feel since July of 1996. And then she put the headset back on. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was not. "There is a little girl down here," the boy was saying. She was crying. "I found her. We are trapped and we need help." "Where are you?" Evelyn asked. "Can you tell me your location? I do not know exactly." "I am in a storm drain, underground. I came in through a grate near 19th Avenue. I think I have been crawling for a long time. There is a chamber where 3 tunnels meet. There is a grate above me, maybe 20 feet up. I can see a little bit of light." Evelyn's fingers were already moving across her keyboard, pulling up schematics of the Phoenix storm drain system, cross-referencing the boy's description with known junction chambers along the 19th Avenue corridor. Her tears were still falling. She did not wipe them. "Okay, I need you to stay calm. What is your name?" "Marcus." "My name is Marcus." "Okay, Marcus, my name is Evelyn. I am going to help you. Both of you. Can you tell me about the little girl?" "Her name is Lily. She is 4 years old. She fell through a hole at a construction site. She has been down here almost 2 days. 2 days. A 4-year-old child underground for 2 days." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She was already composing the dispatch in her head, but already running through the protocols, already calculating how many units she would need and where to send them and how fast they could get there. But there was something else she needed to tell this boy first, something that changed everything. She pulled up the weather data on her second monitor. The National Weather Service had issued a flash flood warning for the Phoenix metro area 2 hours ago. A massive storm system building over the Superstition Mountains was moving west toward the city. The first rain bands had already begun falling in the foothills. All that water running downhill, finding its way into washes and channels and storm drains, seeking the lowest point with the patience and inevitability of gravity itself. "Marcus," Evelyn said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. There is a storm coming. A big one. In about 30 minutes, those tunnels are going to start filling with water. Do you understand what I am telling you?" A pause on the other end, then quiet but clear. "Yes, I understand. We are sending help. Fire department, rescue teams, everyone we have. But I need you to stay on this line. I need you to keep talking to me. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can do that." "And Marcus," the voice cracked. "Just slightly. Just enough. 23 years of professionalism, 23 years of keeping the horror at arm's length. And this boy, this 11-year-old homeless boy, calling from a dying phone in a storm drain, had found the one crack in her armor. I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will not let go of that little girl. No matter what happens, no matter how scared you get, you hold on to her. Do you understand?" A pause. And then, "I promise." Evelyn closed her eyes. The tears kept falling. She let them. "Okay," she said. "Then let us get you both out of there." The clock on the wall read 3:47 in the morning. They had less than an hour. And Evelyn Mercer, who had spent 23 years sitting in a chair answering other people's emergencies, decided that this time she was not going to just sit. She dispatched fire and rescue to the 19th Avenue corridor. She routed additional paramedic units to staging areas along the storm drain access points. She pulled up the engineering schematics and identified the three most likely junction chambers that matched Marcus's description. She called the duty supervisor at the Department of Public Works and demanded immediate access to maintenance records for the tunnel section in question. And then she did something she had never done in 23 years on the job. She picked up the phone and called the newsroom at Channel 5. Evelyn spoke to Marcus through the phone. She kept her voice steady even as her hands shook. She asked him about Lily, about how the girl was doing, about whether she was warm enough, alert enough, scared enough to stay awake. She asked because the information was important, and because keeping Marcus talking was the only way she could keep him calm, and because somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place where 23 years of grief lived like a permanent resident, she was thinking about Nolan. She was thinking about how Nolan must have called for her, must have screamed her name as the water rose around him in that wash behind their house, must have waited for her to come, trusted that she would come, believed until the very last second that his mother would find him in the dark. She had not found him. She had not been there. But she was here now. She was here, and there was a boy in the dark, and there was a girl who needed saving. And this one time, Evelyn Mercer was not going to let the darkness win. "Marcus," she said, "tell me about the token." A pause. "How do you know about the token? You touched it. When you were describing the chamber, you said something about holding on to something around your neck." "What is it?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "It is a copper transit token. My mother gave it to me before she died. It says I'll return on it." Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest, a feeling she had not felt in 23 years, something that might have been recognition, or might have been faith. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said. And Marcus did. He told her about Denise Webb, who worked double shifts at the hospital and still found time to help with homework, who made pancakes on Sunday mornings and let him put as many chocolate chips in them as he wanted, who volunteered at the free clinic on weekends because she said that helping people was not something you did for money. It was something you did because you were alive and they needed help, and that was enough. He told her about the fire, about the token, about the promise. "She said she would return," Marcus said. "She did not." "No," Evelyn said softly, "she did not. But she saved those other kids, 2 of them. They are alive because of her." "Yes. So maybe that is what returning means. Maybe it does not mean coming back yourself. Maybe it means making sure that someone else gets to keep going." The phone beeped. "Battery at 1%, Marcus," Evelyn said. "The phone is almost dead. I need you to listen to me. I am listening. The rescue teams are having trouble getting to you. There are some problems with authorization. But people are working on it. Good people. They are not going to give up. What kind of problems? It does not matter. What matters is that you stay where you are and you keep Lily calm. Can you do that?" "Yes." "And Marcus, if the water starts rising faster, if it looks like you are not going to make it, I need you to take Lily to the highest point you can find. Get her as high as possible. Even a few feet can make the difference. And keep her talking. Hypothermia is going to set in. The colder she gets, the sleepier she will feel. Do not let her fall asleep." "Okay." Evelyn took a breath. She wanted to say more. Wanted to tell him about Nolan. Wanted to tell him that she understood more than anyone alive what it meant to be the person who could not get there in time. Wanted to tell him that what he had done tonight, crawling through those tunnels, finding that little girl staying with her in the dark, was the bravest thing she had heard in 23 years of listening to people at their bravest and their worst. Instead, she said, "You are the bravest person I have ever spoken to. What you did tonight is not something most people could do. It is not something most people would even try." "I did not have a choice," Marcus said. She needed help. "We always have a choice. You chose to be brave. You chose to care. And I want you to know that whatever happens, I am proud of you. I am so proud of you." The phone beeped again. The screen flickered. "Evelyn," Marcus's voice was quieter now. "If I do not make it, if something happens, will you tell people about me? Will you tell them?" I tried silence on the line. "1 second, 2, 3. "You are going to tell them yourself," Evelyn said, "because you are going to make it. Both of you. I believe that." The line went dead. Evelyn sat in her cubicle and stared at the screen that now showed a disconnected call. Around her, the dispatch floor was a controlled chaos of ringing phones and urgent voices and the mechanical rhythm of a system designed to manage emergencies. But for Evelyn in that moment, there was only silence. The silence of a dead phone line, the silence of a boy in the dark, the silence that she had lived with for 23 years, the silence of not being there when it mattered. She stood up. Her supervisor, a man named Donnelly, who had been running the night shift for 15 years, looked up from his console with surprise. Evelyn never stood up during a shift. Evelyn never left her station. Evelyn was the constant, the immovable, the wall. Donnelly, she said, I need you to take my calls for the next 10 minutes. Evelyn, what are you? There are two children trapped in a storm drain at 19th Avenue. The rescue teams cannot get to them because the city council has not authorized excavation. The storm is going to hit in less than 30 minutes. And I am not going to sit here and let those kids drown while someone in a suit argues about budgets. Donnelly stared at her. In 15 years, he had never heard Evelyn raise her voice, had never seen her stand up from her chair during a shift, had never not once seen tears on her face. What are you going to do, he asked. Evelyn reached for the direct line to the fire department dispatch. Everything I can. She made 4 calls in 7 minutes, each one deliberate, each one aimed like a bullet. The first was to Battalion Chief Rollins of the Phoenix Fire Department. Evelyn had worked with Rollins for 12 years. She knew his voice. She knew his temper. She knew that behind the bureaucratic caution that the department demanded, there was a man who had become a firefighter because he believed that saving people was more important than saving careers. She told him in precise, controlled language that 2 children were going to die in the next 30 minutes unless heavy equipment reached the junction chamber at the 19th Avenue corridor. She told him about the collapsed ceiling, the rising water table, the storm that was minutes away from turning those tunnels into a grave. And when Rollins started talking about authorization and procedure and chain of command, Evelyn said something she had never said to anyone in 23 years of professional conduct. She said, if those children die because you followed procedure, you will have to live with that for the rest of your life. I know what that feels like. Trust me, you do not want to find out. Rollins went quiet. Then he said he would see what he could do. The second call was to Kara Fielding at Channel 5 News. Evelyn had never spoken to a reporter about an active case. It violated every protocol she had ever been trained on. It could cost her the job that had been her only reason for getting out of bed for 23 years. She made the call anyway. She gave Fielding the exact location, the exact situation, the name of the city councilman who had blocked the rescue, and one sentence that she knew would make it impossible for the station to ignore. A homeless boy crawled 2 miles through a storm drain to save a 4-year-old girl, and a politician just decided that paperwork is more important than their lives. The third call was to Dean Braddock, Lily's father, the man who had been searching for his daughter for 18 hours, who had been told to stay calm and trust the process and let the professionals handle it. Evelyn pulled his number from the missing persons report that had been filed the morning before and that had generated a search focused entirely on the surface, on the desert, on the places where lost children were usually found. No one had thought to look underground. No one except an 11-year-old boy sleeping under a bridge who had heard a sound that everyone else had missed. Dean Braddock answered on the first ring. His voice was raw from shouting his daughter's name across empty desert for 18 hours. Evelyn told him that Lily was alive, that she had been found, that help was coming. Dean did not ask questions. He did not wait for details. He simply made a sound that might have been a word or might have been a prayer and hung up the phone. The fourth call was the one that would change everything. She called the general dispatcher for the Maricopa County Emergency Services and requested that an open channel broadcast be sent to all volunteer first responders, all off-duty firefighters, all search and rescue personnel, and anyone else who was listening. 2 children trapped underground, 19th Avenue and Southern, storm drain junction chamber, flood imminent, all available hands. The message went out at 3:54 in the morning. By 4 o'clock, the first engines were rolling. By 4:10, the first volunteers were arriving. And by 4:15, Dean Braddock and 37 members of his motorcycle club were roaring down 19th Avenue in a formation that shook windows 3 blocks in every direction. But Evelyn did not know any of that yet. All she knew was that she had done what she could, and that somewhere beneath the city, a boy named Marcus was holding a girl named Lily, and counting the minutes until the water arrived. She put her headset back on. She took the next call. A woman locked out of her car at a gas station. Evelyn walked her through the steps to reach roadside assistance. Professional, calm, steady, as if she had not just set in motion a chain of events that would bring down a politician, unite a community, and prove that sometimes the people the system throws away are the only ones willing to do what the system cannot. The next call was a noise complaint. The one after that, a domestic dispute already in progress, officers en route. Evelyn handled each one with the precision of someone who had been doing this for 23 years. But part of her mind was underground. Part of her mind was in that chamber in the dark with a boy holding a girl and a token pressed against his chest. She thought about what Marcus had said, about his mother, about the token, about the promise that Denise Webb had made and could not keep. I'll return. And Evelyn thought about Nolan, about the plastic Tyrannosaurus Rex, about the gap-toothed smile in the photograph, but she kept face down on her desk. About the 23 years of calls she had answered, each one an act of penance, each one an attempt to be the mother she had not been able to be on that July night when the water came. 23 years of trying to save the boy she could not save. And tonight, finally a chance, not to undo what had happened. Nothing could undo that. But to make sure that this time, this one time, the story ended differently. This time, the child in the water would come home. The storm was still 40 minutes away when the first argument began. Dean Braddock stood in the parking lot of the South Mountain Search Command Post, surrounded by police cruisers and fire trucks, and the hollow-eyed volunteers who had spent 18 hours combing the desert for a girl who was never in the desert to begin with. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. Something that lived in the space between rage and terror. The space where fathers go when their children are missing and the world keeps telling them to be patient. Dean was 47 years old. He had the weathered face and thick forearms of a man who had spent his life working with his hands, first as a welder, then as a mechanic, then as the owner of a custom motorcycle shop on the south side of Phoenix that had become over the years more clubhouse than business. He wore a leather vest over a flannel shirt, the patches on the vest marking him as president of the Desert Iron Motorcycle Club, a brotherhood of 217 men and women who had been dismissed by polite society as thugs and criminals and worse, but who had, over the past 18 hours, done more to search for a missing girl than every official agency combined. His phone had rung 3 minutes ago. A woman's voice, professional but strained, identifying herself as a dispatcher from the 911 center. She told him that Lily had been found alive, underground, in a storm drain, found by a homeless boy who had crawled 2 miles through darkness to reach her. Dean had listened. He had not asked questions. He had not waited for details. He had ended the call, walked to his motorcycle, and started the engine. Now a police captain was standing in his path, middle-aged, tired, the kind of official who had been trained to manage situations rather than solve them. "Mr. Braddock, we need you to wait here. The fire department is en route. They have protocols for confined space rescue. If you show up there, you will only complicate things." Dean looked at him, studied his face the way a man studies a lock he is about to break. Wedding ring, slight paunch, the careful posture of someone who had never been in a fight that mattered. This man went home to his family every night, kissed his kids on the forehead, told them everything would be okay. Dean had not told Lily anything in 2 days, had not known if he would ever tell her anything again. "My daughter has been underground for almost 2 days, Dean said. His voice was low, the kind of low that precedes earthquakes. "There is a flash flood warning, a storm is coming, and you are asking me to wait for protocols. Sir, I understand your concern, but you do not understand anything. You have spent 18 hours searching the desert. 18 hours. Your search teams walked right past the grate she fell through. Your officers told me to stay calm. Trust the process. Let the professionals handle it." Dean stepped closer. The captain stepped back. "Where is my daughter right now? In a hole in the ground. Found by a kid who sleeps under a bridge. A kid who did what your entire department could not do, Mr. Braddock. So do not tell me to wait. Do not tell me to trust the process. The process failed. The system failed. And if you try to stop me from getting to my daughter, you will learn something new about yourself today." Before the captain could respond, a sound filled the parking lot. Low at first, then building. The rumble of engines, not car engines, motorcycle engines, dozens of them roaring into the command post from every direction, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like searchlights sweeping a battlefield. They parked in formation, 37 riders, dismounting in near unison, their boots hitting asphalt like a drum roll. Dean turned to face them, his brothers, the men and women he had ridden with for 20 years, who had answered his call without hesitation, who had searched through the night without complaint, who would follow him into a storm drain or a war zone or the gates of hell without asking for a reason beyond the fact that he needed them there. Colt stepping forward first, 6'3", arms that could bend on rebar, a face that had scared people since childhood, but eyes that went soft when they looked at Dean. We heard Colt said, "Dispatch scanner. She is alive." Dean nodded, words were beyond him. "We're 19th and Southern, near the power substation." Colt turned to the assembled riders. "You heard him, we ride." The captain tried one more time. "Now wait just a minute. You cannot just..." 37 engines roared to life simultaneously. The sound swallowed the captain's words, swallowed the parking lot, swallowed the careful, measured world of protocols and procedures and chains of command. And by the time the sound faded, Dean Braddock and his brothers were already gone, tearing south on 19th Avenue at speeds that made the police scanner light up like a Christmas tree. 4 miles north, in a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Phoenix City Council building, Russell Tate was having a very bad morning. Tate was 53 years old, city councilman for District 7. A man who had built his career on the twin pillars of fiscal responsibility and risk management, who prided himself on making the hard decisions that others were too weak or too sentimental to make. He had been awakened at 3:30 by a call from his chief of staff informing him that an emergency excavation request had been submitted by the fire department. 2 children trapped in a storm drain. Heavy equipment needed. Estimated cost $200,000. Minimum. Tate had dressed, driven to City Hall, and assembled his team around the conference table. City attorneys, budget officials, public relations staff. The fire chief, a man named Rollins, who stood at the far end of the table with his jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscles working beneath his skin. $200,000, Tate said. He said it the way some may say a diagnosis, with the gravity of someone who understands the weight of numbers, for a confined space rescue that may or may not be successful. Sir, Rollins replied, "There are 2 children trapped in that tunnel, a 4-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy. We have less than 40 minutes before the storm hits. Every minute we spend in this room is a minute they are running out of. I understand the timeline, but we have procedures for a reason. If we authorize excavation without proper structural assessment and something goes wrong, the city is liable. We are talking about millions in potential lawsuits. Millions. Something is already going wrong," Rollins said. "There are children underground." Tate held up his hand, the gesture of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. "And the fire department is en route. Correct? We are staged and ready, but we cannot access the chamber without excavation. The original collapse has blocked the main entry points. We need heavy equipment to break through. That requires authorization. From the city. From you." Tate sat back in his chair. Around the table, faces waited. Attorneys calculating liability exposure. Budget officials running numbers. Public relations staff already composing statements for various outcomes. All of them looking to Tate for the decision. The smart decision. The fiscally responsible decision. "How confident are you," Tate asked, "that excavation will succeed in 30 minutes? Rollins hesitated. "We would need to assess the site first, determine the safest approach, run calculations on structural integrity. So you cannot guarantee success. I cannot guarantee anything. But if we do not try, those children will almost certainly drown." Tate nodded slowly. He looked at the city attorney. "Liability exposure. Worst case." The attorney shifted in his seat. "If a rescue worker is injured, if the excavation causes additional collapse, if the children are harmed during the operation, we could be looking at 10 to 15 million. And if we do not authorize." The attorney looked at his hands. "That depends on how things unfold. If the children survive through other means, probably minimal exposure. If they do not," Tate held up his hand again. "I understand." He looked around the table one more time, at Rollins, whose face had gone red with suppressed fury. at the attorneys who would not meet his eyes, at the clock on the wall that read 4:03 in the morning. We cannot set a precedent, Tate said, of bypassing safety protocols every time there is an emergency. The procedures exist for a reason. If we start making exceptions, we undermine the entire system. Sir, Rollins's voice had gone flat. Dangerous. This is not just any emergency. This is 2 children who will die. The fire department has rescue teams on standby. Use them. Find alternative access points. Do what you can with the resources you have. But I am not authorizing $200,000 in emergency excavation without proper assessment. The room went silent. The kind of silence that lives in the space after someone has said something unforgivable, and everyone in the room knows it, Sir Rollins said, slowly, each word placed like a stone. Are you telling me to let those children drown? I am telling you to follow procedure. I am telling you to do your job within the constraints of the system. I am telling you that we cannot spend public money recklessly just because the situation feels urgent. Homeless children are not our priority. We have limited resources. The words landed in the room like a dropped grenade. Even the attorneys looked up. Even the budget officials stopped writing. Even the public relations staff who were paid to spin anything could not find a way to spin what their boss had just said. Rollins stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. You know what I think, Councilman? I think you are more worried about your budget than those kids. I think you would rather let them die than risk a lawsuit. And I think when this is over, everyone is going to know exactly what you are. He walked out. The door did not slam behind him. It closed softly, which was somehow worse. Tate turned to his staff. I want this conversation documented, everything that was said. We need to be clear that we offered all available resources within proper channels. Any accusations of negligence will be unfounded. None of them noticed Megan Hollis, 26 years old, administrative assistant, sitting in the corner with her phone in her lap, its camera recording everything. The red light so small it might as well have been invisible. She had started recording the moment Tate said the word precedent. She would stop recording the moment Tate said unfounded. And in exactly 47 minutes, she would upload 17 minutes of footage to 3 platforms simultaneously and walk out of her apartment and drive to 19th Avenue to see if the children whose lives she had just tried to save were still alive. But that was later. Right now, underground, the water was starting to rise. Marcus heard it before he felt it. A rumbling in the distance, low and steady, like thunder that never stopped. The sound of water moving through pipes that had been dry for months, awakened by falling in mountains 20 miles east. Rain that was finding its way down through 1,000 channels and gullies and washes, all of it flowing toward the city, toward the tunnels, toward the chamber where a boy and a girl sat in the dim light and waited. Marcus looked at Lily. She had crawled closer to him while they waited. Her small body pressed against his side, her hand gripping the hem of his shirt. She was shivering. Her lips had gone from pink to pale to something approaching blue. Hypothermia, just like Evelyn had warned. The phone was dead. Isamoed. The darkness was total, except for the faint orange glow from the grate above. And somewhere in the tunnels, getting louder, with every passing minute, the sound of water gathering force. Marcus had been doing math in his head. The kind of math they do not teach in schools, but that every child who has lived on the streets learns eventually. The math of time and distance and probability. How long before the water reaches us? How high will it rise? How long can we hold our breath? What are the odds? The odds were not good. He knew that. But he also knew something else. Something that Evelyn had taught him in their brief conversation, though she probably did not realize she was teaching it. That knowing the odds does not mean accepting them. That being afraid does not mean being defeated. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay where you are when every instinct tells you to run. Lily, Marcus said, I need you to stay awake. Can you do that for me? I am tired, I know, but we need to stay awake, both of us. Tell me about Biscuit. What color is he? Lily's eyes brightened slightly. Brown, with one white ear, and he has a spot on his tummy that looks like a star. A star. That is special. Does he do any tricks? He can sit and shake, and he steals Daddy's socks and hides them under my bed. Marcus smiled, a real smile despite everything. He steals socks every day. Daddy says bad words when he cannot find them. Lily almost smiled too. Almost. But the rumbling was louder now, and the water at the base of the debris pile was higher than it had been 5 minutes ago, and the almost smile faded into something that looked like the beginning of tears. Marcus, is the water going to come up here? No. Marcus lied. We are too high. Promise. He looked at her face, at the trust in her eyes, at the way she was holding his shirt like it was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water and darkness. I promise. The water arrived 3 minutes later. Not gradually, not slowly. It came in a surge. A wall of brown water carrying debris and filth and the accumulated runoff of a desert storm that was just beginning to make its presence felt. The chamber floor that had been ankle-deep went to knee-deep in seconds, then waist-deep. The current pulling at the debris pile, tugging at the loose concrete and rebar, trying to dismantle the only high ground they had. Marcus grabbed Lily and pulled her higher. The slope of collapsed ceiling rose maybe 8 feet above the original floor level. Not high enough, not nearly high enough. But it was what they had. The water climbed, chest deep on Marcus. He lifted Lily onto his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair, her legs wrapped around his neck. She was crying now silently, her body shaking against his head. Hold on, he said. Hold on to me. I am holding. Her voice was thin, trembling. But she was not screaming. She had moved past screaming into something else, something that looked like determination. 4 years old, and she was holding on with everything she had. The water reached Marcus's shoulders. He tilted his head back, keeping his mouth above the surface. The cold was everywhere now, not just around him, but inside him, reaching into his chest and squeezing his lungs, making every breath a fight. His feet were barely touching the debris pile. The current was pulling. His muscles were shaking. His body was shutting down one system at a time, conserving what little heat it had left for the organs that mattered. The token pressed against his chest, cold now like the water, like everything, but still there, still present, still carrying the weight of a promise made by a woman who had chosen to save strangers over saving herself. Marcus, Lily's voice from above, quiet, dreamy, the hypothermia taking hold, softening the edges of her fear, pulling her toward a sleep she might not wake from. Yeah, I am cold, I know. I am too. But we are going to be okay. Help is coming. How do you know? Because I promised. And I do not break my promises. Tell me a story. Mommy used to tell me stories when I was scared. About princesses and dragons and happy endings. Marcus's chin touched the water. He tilted his head further back. Bought himself another inch. Another few seconds. Once upon a time, he said there was a boy who lived under a bridge. Was he a prince now? He was just a boy. He did not have a family or a home or anyone who cared about him. But he had something special. A magic token that his mother gave him before she went away. What did the token do? It helped him be brave. Whenever he was scared, he would hold the token and remember that his mother loved him. And that gave him the strength to do hard things. The water touched his lips. He closed his mouth, breathed through his nose, kept talking and burst between breaths. One day the boy heard someone crying in a dark place underground. And even though he was scared, he went to help. Did he find them? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, he found a princess, a real one, with golden hair and a beautiful name. What was her name? Lily. The water closed over Marcus's head. He held his breath, held Lily above him, felt her small body shifting on his shoulders, felt her hands tightening in his hair, felt the desperate thrashing as she realized what was happening as the water lapped at her waist, her chest, her chin. She was screaming his name now, but the sound was muffled by the water in his ears and the roaring of his own blood and the terrible, absolute silence of drowning. His lungs burned, his vision went white, his body screamed for air that was not there. His hands wrapped around Lily's legs began to loosen. Not because he wanted to let go, because his muscles had reached the limit of what will alone could sustain. Because the body, even the body of a boy who had crawled 2 miles through darkness for a stranger, has a breaking point. The token pressed against his chest one last time. I'll return. And then above him, above the water, above the darkness that was closing in light. Not street light, not the faint orange glow of the grate he had been staring at for hours. This was white light, brilliant and harsh and blinding. Flashlight beams cutting through the water from above, turning the dark chamber into something that looked like an underwater cathedral. And hands, strong hands reaching down through the opening that had not been there before. An opening torn through earth and concrete and rebar by 200 people digging with shovels and picks in their bare bleeding fingers. Hands grabbing Lily, pulling her up and out. Hands reaching back down, finding Marcus's arms, his shoulders, his face, pulling him toward the surface, toward the light, toward something that felt impossibly like salvation. Dean Braddock had reached the scene at 4:23 in the morning. He dismounted before his motorcycle had fully stopped, letting it fall to the asphalt as he sprinted toward the cluster of firefighters standing near the storm drain grate. His brothers formed a wall behind him. 37 riders who had followed him from the command post, their faces hard with purpose, their boots heavy on the wet pavement. "Where is she?" Dean demanded. "Where is my daughter?" The fire captain stepped forward, his expression caught between frustration and relief. "Mr. Braddock, we have located the chamber where the children are trapped. It is approximately 40 feet below the surface, accessible through a collapsed section of the main drainage tunnel." "Then get them out. We cannot." The captain gestured toward the grate where the sound of rushing water was growing louder by the minute. "The access points are blocked by debris from the original collapse. We need excavation equipment, heavy machinery, backhoes, jackhammers, equipment that we have staged and ready to deploy." "Then deploy it." "We cannot. Not without authorization from the city council. We submitted an emergency request 20 minutes ago. It was denied." Dean went very still, the kind of still that precedes violence, the kind of still that makes every person in the vicinity take a small unconscious step backward. "Denied," he repeated. Councilman Tate determined that proper structural assessment was required before any excavation could proceed. He cited liability concerns, budget constraints, standard procedure for emergency infrastructure intervention. The silence that followed was louder than the approaching storm. Then Colt stepped forward, his massive hands curling into fists the size of dinner plates. "Let me make sure I understand," Colt said. His voice was dangerously calm. "There are 2 children drowning under our feet right now, and some politician in a suit decided that paperwork was more important than their lives." "That is correct. And you are just going to stand here." The captain's jaw tightened. His eyes went hard, not with anger at Colt, with anger at the situation, at the system he served, at the impossible choice between following orders and doing what was right. "I have been a firefighter for 22 years, the captain said. "I have pulled bodies out of car wrecks and house fires and every kind of disaster this city can produce. Do you think I want to stand here? Do you think any of us want to stand here?" He gestured at his crew, at the men and women in turnout gear who were watching the exchange with barely contained fury. Their helmets on, their gear ready, their hands empty because someone 4 miles away had decided that money mattered more than minutes. "We want to dig," the captain said. "We want to save those kids. But if we proceed without authorization and something goes wrong, every single one of us loses our job, our pensions, everything we have worked for. And the city gets sued. And the next time something like this happens, there will be even more red tape, even more delays, even more children dying while bureaucrats argue about procedure." Dean stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to face the crowd of bikers that had gathered behind him. Not just the 37 from the command post. More were arriving every minute. Trucks pulling into the nearby parking lot. More motorcycles rumbling down the street. The call had gone out on the club's emergency network, and every rider within 300 miles was answering. Tucson, Flagstaff, Las Vegas. They were coming from everywhere. "Brothers," Dean said. His voice carried across the crowd. "Sisters, you heard the man. The city says we cannot dig. The politicians say we have to wait. The system says that procedure is more important than my daughter's life." He paused. "I say different." The response was immediate, a roar of agreement that drowned out the distant thunder. 200 voices declaring in unison that they did not care about procedure, did not care about authorization, did not care about anything except the 2 children trapped beneath their feet. "Shovels," Dean said. "Picks, pry bars, anything that can move dirt. We dig by hand if we have to. We dig until our fingers bleed. But we do not stop until those kids are out." The crowd surged forward. Within seconds, tools appeared from saddlebags and truck beds in the hands of civilians who had brought them from home after hearing the news on the radio. A man in a bathrobe carrying a garden spade, a woman in scrubs with a tire iron, a teenager with a crowbar he had grabbed from his father's garage, all of them converging on the patch of earth where the grate sat embedded in cracked concrete. "Wait," the fire captain said. Dean turned. "If you dig in the wrong place, then tell us where to dig. Help us do this right, or get out of the way." The captain hesitated. Everything he had worked for was on the line. His career, his pension, his reputation. But somewhere below his feet, a boy was holding a girl above rising water. And the boy was running out of time, and the girl was running out of warmth, and no amount of career preservation was worth the weight of knowing he could have helped and chose not to. He made his choice. The structural weakness is there. He pointed to a spot 10 feet from the grate. The original collapse created a void space that extends almost to the surface. If you dig there, you might be able to break through without causing additional collapse. Might it is the best chance we have. Dean nodded, then let us get to work. By 4:27, the first shovel had bitten into the earth. 200 people attacking the ground with everything they had. Bikers in leather vests working alongside firefighters in turnout gear. Police officers who had given up any pretense of control, grabbing shovels and digging. Civilians in pajamas using garden trowels, cutting through sod with kitchen knives, moving dirt with their bare hands. Kara Fielding had positioned herself at the edge of the excavation, broadcasting live to what would eventually become 14 million viewers. Her cameraman tracking the chaos. "I have never seen anything like this," she said into her microphone. "The official rescue has been blocked by bureaucratic red tape, so the community has taken matters into their own hands." The rain started at 4:31, light at first, then harder. The ground turning to mud under 200 pairs of feet. Everyone knew what the rain meant. Everyone dug faster. The hole was 3 feet deep, then 4, then 5. The mud came up dark and heavy, mixed with decades of urban accumulation, broken glass, plastic bags, rusted metal, things no one wanted to identify. Colt had stripped off his leather vest and was attacking the earth with a pickaxe, each swing burying the blade 6 inches into packed soil. His arms were covered in mud to the shoulders. His face was a mask of exertion and rage. Beside him, Reeves, a firefighter with 17 years on the ball and 2 daughters at home, matched him swing for swing. Her turnout coat was gone, her helmet discarded. She was working in her undershirt, her arms trembling from exertion but refusing to slow. Behind them, a human chain had formed, buckets and wheelbarrows and bare hands passing dirt away from the hole, clearing space for the diggers. Someone had backed a pickup truck to the edge of the site and turned on its headlights, creating a pool of white light that turned the rain into silver needles and the mud into something that looked like wet concrete. Dean was in the hole itself, waist deep, digging with a shovel that he swung like a weapon. His hands had blistered inside his gloves, and the blisters had burst, and the blood was mixing with the mud, and he did not feel any of it. He did not feel the rain or the cold, or the ache in his back, or the burning in his arms. He felt only the urgency, the terrible compressing urgency of a father who knows that the ground beneath his feet is the only thing between him and his child. At 6 feet, someone heard a voice, faint, a child's voice. "Help! Please help! The water is rising." Dean dropped to his knees at the edge of the hole. "Lily, can you hear me? Daddy is here." "We are coming, Daddy." The voice was stronger. "Closer. Daddy, I am scared. The water is cold. The boy is holding me, but he is under the water and he will not answer me." Dean felt the ground tilt beneath him, dug faster, screamed at everyone around him to dig faster. And they did. Every person on that site dug like their own children were in the ground, because in that moment they were. The breakthrough came at 4:43. Reeves, who had been swinging a pickaxe for 16 straight minutes, punched through into empty space. Her handle nearly slipped from her grip as the resistance vanished. She stumbled back, and Colt was there instantly, widening the hole, with his hands tearing away chunks of earth and concrete. Light poured down into the chamber. Flashlights converged, and what they illuminated would haunt every person who saw it. Water, rising fast, already within inches of the ceiling. And in that water, 2 figures, a small girl with blonde hair held above the surface by arms that were barely visible. and below her, completely submerged, a boy who was not moving. Dean did not wait for rope, did not wait for harnesses or procedures or the careful deliberation of men trained in confined space rescue. He grabbed a rope from someone's hands, tied it around his waist, and lowered himself into the hole. The water hit him like a punch, cold enough to stop his breath. Current strong enough to tear the rope from his grip if his hands had been any weaker. He fought toward them, his head barely above water, his arms reaching for his daughter. Daddy. Her voice was fading, her face was white, her lips were blue, but she was alive. Dean grabbed her, pulled her to his chest, felt her small arms wrap around his neck with desperate strength. I have her, he shouted toward the opening. Pull us up, wait! Lily's voice in his ear, a whisper. You have to get the boy. He held me up the whole time. He did not let go. Dean looked down. Marcus was still underwater, still in the position that had held Lily above the surface, still not moving. Pull us up, Dean shouted. Then send the rope back down. The rope went taut. Dean rose through the water with Lily clutched to his chest, broke the surface, hands grabbed them both, pulled them out of the hole and into the rain and the noise and the light. Dean handed Lily to Colt, who wrapped her in someone's jacket and held her against his chest like she was the most fragile thing in the world. Then Dean grabbed the rope. I'm going back down, he said. The water level is too high, someone said. If you go back, my daughter is alive because of that boy. I am not leaving him to drown. He lowered himself back into the hole. The water had risen another 6 inches in the 30 seconds since he had emerged. Dean took a breath, the deepest breath of his life, and dove, down through water that was black and cold and full of debris, his hands reaching, searching, finding nothing. Then something, an arm, thin, cold, still. He grabbed it and pulled, kicked toward the surface, fought the current with everything he had left, his lungs empty, his muscles failing, the cold stealing the last of his strength. He broke the surface, gasping, dragged the boy with him, held his head above the water. The rope went taut. Hands reached down, grabbed them both, hauled them up through the opening and into the world. Marcus Webb emerged from the ground at 4:46 in the morning, 23 minutes before sunrise, 2 hours and 29 minutes after he had lowered himself through a storm grate on 19th Avenue to follow a sound that no one else had heard. He was not breathing. The paramedics took over instantly. 2 of them, a man and a woman, their faces grim and professional. They laid him on the mud, checked his pulse, found nothing, started chest compressions with the mechanical precision of people who had done this 1,000 times before. 1, 2, 3, 4, find 1, breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, basically just breathe. The crowd that had been cheering moments earlier went silent. 200 people standing in the rain, watching a boy die on the ground, their muddy faces slack with the particular horror of watching something miraculous turn to tragedy in the space of a heartbeat. Colt stood with Lily in his arms. The girl was wrapped in someone's jacket, shivering, but conscious, her eyes fixed on the still form of the boy who had held her above the water. She was whispering something, over and over, the same word, his name. Dean was on his knees beside the paramedics' water, dripping from every surface of his body, his face a ruin of fear and exhaustion. He had pulled this boy from the water, had felt the weight of him impossibly light for everything he had done, had held his head above the surface and felt the stillness in his limbs, and known with the terrible certainty that comes from holding a body that has given everything it has, that this boy was dying. 1 minute of compressions, 2 minutes. The paramedics worked. The rain fell. Lightning strobed across the sky, turning everything white for an instant before plunging it back into the gray half-light of a storm that was not finished. No response, no cough, no gasp, nothing. Call it, someone said quietly, the words carrying across the silence like a stone thrown into still water. No. Reeves pushed through the circle, shoved the paramedic aside with more force than was strictly professional, dropped to her knees in the mud beside Marcus's body. She placed her hands on his chest, fingers interlaced heel of her palm, centered over his sternum. She had 2 daughters at home, 7 and 9. She thought about them every time she responded to a call involving children. She thought about them now. You are not dying, she said through her teeth. Not after everything you did, not after what you survived. You are not dying on my watch. Compress, compress, compress. Her arms pistoning with a force that bordered on violence, each push driving her weight through her shoulders and into the chest of a boy who had held a 4-year-old girl above a flood with his bare hands. Come on, kid. Come on. Breathe, fight. You did not crawl 2 miles through the dark to die in the rain. You did not hold that little girl above the water with your last breath just to stop breathing now. Come on. Compress, compress, compress. 10 seconds, 20, 30, the longest 30 seconds of every life that witnessed them. And then, a cough, weak at first, then stronger. Water spewing from Marcus's mouth, brown and foul, the water that had filled his lungs, the water that had tried to claim him. His eyes flew open, wide, panicked, seeing nothing and everything at once. And he gasped, a raw, desperate, beautiful inhalation of air, the sound of a life refusing to end. The crowd erupted, 200 voices raised in the rain cheering the return of a boy most of them had never met. Firefighters embracing bikers, police officers wiping their eyes with muddy hands, civilians holding strangers like family. Colt let out a sound that might have been a sob, or might have been a war cry, and held Lily tighter against his chest. Dean Braddock collapsed onto his hands and knees in the mud, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking, making sounds that no one could hear over the cheering, but that everyone understood. And in the middle of it all, Marcus Webb looked up at the faces above him and said the first words that came to his mind. "Where is Lily? Is she okay?" Dean Braddock pushed through the crowd and knelt beside the boy who had saved his daughter. "She is okay," he said. His voice broke on the second word. "She is alive because of you." Marcus's eyes found Dean's. For a moment, neither of them spoke, rain falling between them, everything else falling away. "I promised her," Marcus said. "I promised I would not let go." Dean nodded, tears running down his face indistinguishable from the rain. "You kept your promise," he said. "You kept your promise." And then Dean reached down and pulled Marcus into his arms and held him. Held the homeless boy who had saved his daughter. Held him tight enough to feel his heartbeat, the heartbeat that had almost stopped the heartbeat, that was still going, still fighting, still refusing to quit. Around them the rain began to ease. And somewhere above the clouds, the first light of dawn broke through like a promise being kept. 4 miles north in her cubicle at the Phoenix Emergency Communications Center, Evelyn Mercer had been listening. She had been listening for the past hour. Not to the callers on her headset, though she had handled each of those with her usual precision. She had been listening to the emergency channel, the one that carried the chatter between fire crews and police units and the paramedics who were staging at the site. She had been listening to the updates that came in bursts of static and shorthand. Excavation in progress. 200 plus on site. Water rising below. No contact with subjects. She had heard the moment they broke through. The shout that cut through the radio chatter like a blade. Contact. We have visual. 2 subjects. One above water, one submerged. She had heard the silence that followed the extraction. The terrible stretching silence that meant someone was not breathing. She had counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Each one a lifetime. Each one a repetition of the worst night of her life, the night she sat in this exact chair and listened to the radio while strangers searched for her son in the flood. And then she heard it. Both subjects extracted. Both alive. The boy is being resuscitated. Stand by. Evelyn closed her eyes. Her hand found the jar of river pebbles on her desk and held it. 40 seconds later, the boy is breathing. Both subjects en route to St. Joseph's Medical Center. Evelyn removed her headset. She placed it on the desk beside the face-down photograph and the jar of stones she had collected from the wash where her son had died. She put her face in her hands, and she wept. Not quietly, not the controlled tears she had allowed herself earlier, the brief crack in the wall that she had sealed back up within seconds. This was different. This was 23 years of grief and guilt and longing breaking through the wall she had built around herself, flooding out of her in waves that she could not control and did not try to. This was the sound of a woman who had spent 2 decades being strong, finally allowing herself to be broken. Not broken in the way that destroys, broken in the way that lets the light in. She cried for Nolan, for the gap-toothed smile she would never see again, For the Tyrannosaurus Rex she had found in a box in the garage 3 years after the funeral and held against her chest until her hands went numb. For the 23 birthdays she had spent alone lighting a candle on a cupcake and blowing it out in an empty kitchen. She cried for Marcus, for the 11-year-old boy who had crawled through 2 miles of darkness because he heard a sound that mattered, for the copper token and the mother who had given it to him, and the promise that had been broken by fire the same way hers had been broken by water. She cried for Lily, for the 4-year-old girl who had sat in the dark for 2 days singing to herself because singing was the only weapon she had against the silence. And she cried for herself, for the woman who had turned a photograph face down and kept it there for 6 years, for the woman who had answered thousands of calls and saved countless lives and never once allowed herself to believe that any of it mattered, because the one life she could not save was the only one she had ever counted. The other dispatchers watched. They did not approach. They did not speak. They simply witnessed, because they understood in the way that people who work in emergency services understand that some things cannot be interrupted. Some things need to run their course. Some walls need to come down completely before anything new can be built in their place. Evelyn cried for 6 minutes. Then she wiped her face with the sleeve of the cardigan she had owned for 9 years. She reached across her desk, and for the first time in 6 years, she turned the photograph face up. Nolan looked back at her, gap-toothed smile, brown hair that would not stay combed, eyes that were her eyes, the same shade of gray, the same way they crinkled at the corners when something delighted him. "Hi, baby," she whispered. Then she put her headset back on and took the next call, an elderly woman who had fallen in her bathroom. Evelyn walked her through the steps to check for broken bones and stay warm until the ambulance arrived. Professional, calm, steady, but something was different. Something had shifted. The wall was gone. The dam had broken. And in its place was something new. Something that felt like the first deep breath after a long time underwater. The video dropped at 6:14 in the morning. 17 minutes of footage recorded on a personal phone by a 26-year-old administrative assistant named Megan Hollis, who had sat in the corner of a conference room at the Phoenix City Council building, watching a man named Russell Tate make decisions about children's lives, like he was reviewing a quarterly earnings report. She had recorded everything. Tate's voice cold and clinical, saying words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "We cannot set a precedent of bypassing safety protocols every time there is an emergency." The fire chief's face, desperate and disbelieving, asking the question that no one in that room could answer. "Are you telling me to let those children drown?" And the precise moment captured in high definition on a phone, that cost $300 and would ultimately cost Russell Tate everything when he said the 6 words that ended his career. "Homeless children are not our priority." Megan uploaded the video to 3 platforms simultaneously: YouTube, Twitter, the tip line at Channel 5 News, where Kara Fielding had already been broadcasting live from the rescue site for 2 hours. Then Megan walked out of her apartment, got in her car, and drove to 19th Avenue. She wanted to see if the children were alive. She needed to see it, because she had sat in that room and listened to a man calculate their worth in dollars and liability exposure, and she needed to know that the world was better than what she had witnessed. The children were alive. She arrived in time to see the ambulances pulling away, lights flashing, sirens splitting the dawn. She stood in the rain with 200 strangers and watched them go. Then she went home and slept for 14 hours. By 7 in the morning, the video had 200,000 views. By 8, it was the top trending topic on Twitter. By 9, every major news network in the country was running it on loop. Anchors with carefully composed expressions of outrage, delivering commentary that wrote itself. CNN reported that a city councilman had called homeless children not our priority while blocking a rescue. Other networks ran similar stories, each one amplifying the footage, each one driving the view count higher. The comment sections became something between a courthouse and a bonfire. Rage and disbelief and demands for accountability pouring in from every corner of the country. Parents who could not imagine someone saying those words while children drowned. Teachers and social workers and first responders who had spent their careers fighting the exact system that Tate represented. Ordinary people who had never thought about storm drains or emergency excavation budgets or the bureaucratic machinery that decides every day which lives are worth saving and which are not. But it was not just anger. There was also something else in those comments. Something that surprised even the reporters who were tracking the story's spread. People were talking about Marcus, not as a victim, not as a charity case, not with the pitying language that society usually reserves for homeless children. They were talking about him with awe, with admiration, with a kind of reverence that is normally reserved for soldiers and saints and the people whose names end up on buildings. A homeless boy did what an entire city could not do. That comment appeared in 1,000 variations. On Twitter and Facebook and Reddit, in the message boards of motorcycle clubs across the country, the story had become something larger than a rescue. It had become a referendum on who matters, on who gets saved and who gets forgotten, on whether the systems designed to protect people actually protect them or just protect the people who run the systems. Russell Tate woke at 7:30 to 17 missed calls from his chief of staff. He did not understand what was happening at first. Did not understand why his phone kept buzzing, why his email showed 400 unread messages, why his doorbell was ringing. Then he turned on the television. His face stared back at him from the screen. His voice played through the speakers. His words repeated on a loop like a verdict being read. Homeless children are not our priority. Tate's first instinct was denial. The recording was taken out of context. The full conversation showed a more nuanced position. He had been discussing resource allocation, not making a value judgment about children's lives. His second instinct was to fight, call the lawyers, call the PR team, prepared a statement that would reframe the narrative. His third instinct, the one that might have saved him, was to apologize, to admit that he had been wrong, to own the mistake and let the public see something human behind the words that had horrified them. He chose to fight. He put on his best suit, combed his hair, practiced his most reasonable expression in the mirror, the one he used at budget meetings and fundraisers, the one that communicated competence and calm in equal measure. And he drove to City Hall to hold a press conference that would go down as one of the most catastrophic political decisions in the history of Phoenix municipal government. The press room was full, every local outlet, 3 national networks, cameras positioned in a semicircle around the podium like the cannons of a firing squad. Reporters who had been up all night covering the rescue, who had stood in the rain and watched 200 people dig with their bare hands, who had filmed the moment a boy who was not breathing started breathing again. These reporters did not have questions. They had ammunition. Ladies and gentlemen, Tate began standing at a podium that seemed to shrink around him as the cameras rolled. I want to address the video that has been circulating online. The recording you have seen was taken out of context and does not represent the full picture of what happened last night. The questions came like artillery. Councilman Tate, a reporter shouted, "Do you regret saying that homeless children are not a priority?" That statement was part of a larger discussion about resource allocation. The children almost died. Do you regret your decision? I made the best decision I could with the information available at the time. A boy named Marcus Webb crawled 2 miles through a storm drain to save a 4-year-old girl while you were worried about liability. Do you have anything to say to him? Tate's composure cracked, not dramatically, not visibly to the cameras, but to anyone watching closely. The shift was unmistakable. The tightening around the eyes, the way his fingers gripped the podium, the micro-expression of a man who has just realized that the hole he is digging is deeper than the one 200 people dug on 19th Avenue. I am not going to stand here and be lectured about priorities, he said. Every day I make decisions that affect millions of lives. Every day I have to balance competing interests and limited resources. If I authorized emergency spending every time someone claimed there was an urgent situation, we would be bankrupt within a year. So you stand by your decision. I stand by the process. I stand by the system that has served this city for decades. From the back of the room, Kara Fielding's voice, clear and calm and surgical. Councilman Tate, I want to make sure I understand your position. You are saying that even knowing how close those children came to dying, even seeing the footage of volunteers digging with their bare hands, because your department refused to authorize equipment, you would make the same decision again. Procedures exist for a reason. Emotional reactions do not make good policy. Kara nodded slowly. Thank you for clarifying. She turned to her cameraman. Did you get that? Every word. The resignation came faster than anyone predicted. Within 24 hours, Tate had lost the support of every member of the city council. Within 48 hours, the mayor called for his immediate removal. Within 72 hours, Russell Tate stood at the same podium where he had sealed his fate and read a prepared statement that fooled no one. He resigned. He did not apologize. He maintained that his actions were within the bounds of proper procedure. The crowd that had gathered outside City Hall booed so loudly that his final words were lost to the sound of a city that had decided collectively and irrevocably that procedure without compassion was not procedure at all. It was cowardice. Tate would move to Scottsdale, would take a consulting job with a private firm that managed municipal budgets, would spend the rest of his career in rooms where no one knew his name or recognized his face doing the same work he had always done, counting the same numbers, managing the same risks. He would never hold public office again. He would never hold a press conference again. He would never say the words, "not our priority" again, without hearing them echoed back to him in the voice of every person who had ever been told that their life was worth less than a line item on a spreadsheet. That was the personal cost. The systemic cost was larger. The federal investigation launched 3 weeks after the rescue. What began as an inquiry into Tate's specific decisions expanded rapidly into a comprehensive audit of Phoenix's emergency response protocols and infrastructure maintenance records. Federal investigators working alongside state inspectors and independent engineers pulled records from the Department of Public Works going back 15 years. What they found was a system that had been rotting from the inside for more than a decade. Maintenance logs for the storm drain system had been falsified. Quarterly inspections that were supposed to be conducted by trained engineers had been reduced to paperwork exercises, forms signed in offices by people who had never set foot inside a tunnel. Warning signs at construction sites were routinely removed to avoid liability claims rather than to address the hazards they warned about. Safety barriers were checked off as installed on forms that were filed in cabinets, while the actual barriers sat in storage warehouses gathering dust. The collapse that had trapped Lily Braddock had been predicted in an engineering report from 2012. A structural engineer named Gerald Whitfield had been hired by the city to assess a section of the storm drain system near 19th Avenue after residents reported sinkholes forming in a nearby parking lot. Whitfield had spent 3 days underground with a team of 2 assistants mapping cracks and measuring load tolerances and taking core samples from concrete that had been poured in 1974 and had not been properly maintained since. His report was 47 pages long. It identified 17 critical failure points. It recommended immediate repairs to 6 of them, including the junction chamber, where 12 years later, a 4-year-old girl would sit in the dark for 2 days waiting for someone to find her. Estimated cost of repairs, $140,000. The report was submitted to the Department of Public Works on March 14, 2012. It was acknowledged, filed, and never acted upon. Whitfield, who had retired to Flagstaff 3 years later, would learn about the rescue on the evening news and sit in his kitchen with the report open on his laptop, reading his own 12-year-old warnings and crying because he had known and no one had listened. 7 city officials faced criminal charges. 3 pleaded guilty to negligence resulting in endangerment. 2 went to trial and were convicted. 1, a deputy director of public works named Harold Stenson, received 18 months in federal prison for destroying documents related to the cover-up. The civil lawsuits that followed resulted in settlements totaling $14 million. The money went to infrastructure improvements, advocacy organizations, and a new emergency response fund designed to eliminate the kind of bureaucratic delays that had nearly killed 2 children on a night in August. Evelyn drove to the hospital on the morning after the rescue. She had finished her shift at 7, had driven home through streets that were still wet from the storm, past puddles that reflected the gray morning sky, past a construction site on 19th Avenue that was now surrounded by yellow tape and news vans and the curious crowds that tragedy always attracts. She had showered, changed into clothes that did not smell like coffee and recycled air, made breakfast that she did not eat, and then stood in her kitchen for 20 minutes with her car keys in her hand trying to decide. Should she go? Did she have the right? Was showing up at a stranger's bedside and saying, "I am the voice you heard on the phone," an act of compassion or an act of selfishness? A way of offering comfort or a way of claiming a role in someone else's story? She had spent 23 years being professional, 23 years maintaining boundaries, 23 years keeping the horror at arm's length so that she could do her job without the job destroying her. But last night she had crossed every boundary she had. She had cried in front of her colleagues. She had called a reporter. She had given information to a civilian. She had done things that could have ended her career, and she had done them without hesitation because there were children in the dark, and the rules that existed to protect the system were the same rules that were killing them. She went anyway, because Marcus had asked her a question in the last seconds before the phone died. "Will you tell people about me? Will you tell them I tried?" And she had answered, "You are going to tell them yourself." And she wanted to make sure that was true. She needed to see him. Needed to see him breathing and alive and real. Needed to know that this one time, the story did not end the way it had ended on Juniper Lane. The hospital room was crowded. Bikers in leather vests. Firefighters in uniform. Nurses trying to enforce visiting hours and failing spectacularly. Civilians who had dug in the rain and now stood in the hallway holding flowers and stuffed animals and cards written in shaky handwriting by children they had brought along because they wanted them to see what bravery looked like. Evelyn stood at the door. She did not go in. She watched Marcus through the glass. He was awake, propped up in bed with an IV in his arm and a thermal blanket across his legs, and a 4-year-old girl curled up beside him who had apparently climbed into the bed without asking anyone's permission and had no intention of leaving. Lily was talking, telling Marcus about Biscuit, who had been found by a neighbor 3 blocks from the construction site unharmed and apparently confused about what all the fuss was about. Marcus was listening with the patient attention of someone who understood that being listened to was a gift because he had spent 2 years in a world where no one listened to him at all. Evelyn watched them for a long time, then she walked in. The crowd parted for her the way it had parted for Dean Braddock, not because they knew who she was, but because something in the way she moved, something in the expression on her face told them that she belonged here, that she had earned this moment in a currency that could not be counted. Marcus looked up. Their eyes met. "I am Evelyn," she said. "We talked on the phone." Marcus's breath caught. The voice that had kept him calm in the darkness. The voice that had promised not to leave him. The voice that had called him brave when he did not feel brave, that had told him she was proud of him when no one had told him that in 2 years. "You stayed," he said. "I stayed." Evelyn sat on the edge of his bed. Her hand found his, small and rough, the hand of a boy who had crawled through 2 miles of concrete on his palms. "I told you I would, and I did." She paused, looked at him, really looked at him. Not at the patient in the hospital bed, not at the hero the news was already calling him, but at the boy. The 11-year-old boy who had been sleeping under a bridge 6 hours ago and who was now surrounded by more people than he had spoken to in 2 years combined. "I have been doing this job for 23 years, she said. Thousands of calls, thousands of people in crisis. I have talked to people on the worst nights of their lives. And in all that time, I have never cried on the job. Until last night. Until you called me and said 3 words that broke something open inside me that I had been keeping locked for 23 years. Marcus did not speak. He waited, the way he had waited in the tunnel, patient, present, ready to hear whatever came next. "I lost my son," Evelyn said, 23 years ago, a flash flood, just like the one that almost took you. He was 6 years old. His name was Nolan, and I was at work when it happened, sitting in my chair, wearing my headset, answering someone else's call while my boy was in the water." Her voice did not break. She had earned the right to tell this story without breaking. She had paid for that right in 23 years of silence. "Every call I have answered since then," she continued, "every child in danger, every desperate parent I have been trying to make up for that night, trying to save the boy I could not save. And for 23 years, I carried that weight alone. I turned his photograph face down. I stopped visiting his grave. I stopped saying his name because saying his name made him real. And if he was real, then he was gone. And if he was gone, then I had failed." She looked at Marcus. Her eyes were bright but steady. "But then you called, and you said I can hear her. And something in me knew that this was the call I had been waiting for. Not to undo what happened to Nolan. Nothing can undo that. But to prove that the darkness does not always win. That sometimes someone hears the crying. That sometimes the person who shows up is enough." She squeezed his hand. "You saved that little girl, but you also saved me. You gave me something I had given up hoping for. a reason to believe that it is worth answering the phone, that it is worth staying on the line, that it is worth being the voice in the dark even when you cannot be the hands that pull someone free. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the only thing that made sense. "Thank you for not hanging up." Evelyn laughed, half joy, half tears. The sound of someone who has been holding their breath for 23 years and has finally exhaled. "Thank you," she said, "for answering in the first place." The adoption papers were filed 2 weeks later. Marcus had expected the process to take months, years maybe. He had been in the system long enough to know how slowly these things moved, how many obstacles existed between a homeless child and a permanent home. Background checks, home studies, court appearances, the grinding machinery of a bureaucracy that was designed to protect children, but that sometimes protected them right into loneliness. He had not counted on Dean Braddock. The man who had led 200 strangers to dig through mud with their bare hands was not the kind of person who accepted bureaucratic delays. He hired lawyers. He called politicians. He showed up at every hearing in person, his leather vest visible beneath his suit jacket, his brothers filling the gallery behind him like a wall of muscle and quiet menace. Not threatening, just present, just making it very clear that this was a man who had a community behind him, and that community expected results. The judge who approved the adoption would later tell a reporter that it was the easiest decision she had ever made. Not because of the lawyers or the political pressure, but because of the way Lily Braddock looked at Marcus Webb. Like he was already her brother. Like he had been her brother all along. Like the paperwork was just the world catching up to something that had already been decided in a dark chamber 40 feet underground. The ceremony took place in the courtyard of the Maricopa County Superior Court on an October morning that smelled like rain and new beginnings. 217 bikers attended their motorcycles lined up in the parking lot in rows so precise they looked military. Firefighters came in uniform. Police officers took time off shift. Rollins was there, the fire chief who had walked out of Tate's conference room and then walked to the excavation site and pointed where to dig. He had been placed on administrative leave for 2 weeks after the rescue. When he returned, he was given a commendation. The department had not apologized for the leave. He had not asked for an apology. Some things were more important than being right. Reeves was there, standing in the back, her arms crossed, her eyes red. She had not told anyone that she had cried every night for a week after the rescue, that she had gone home to her 2 daughters and held them so tight they asked her what was wrong, and she could not answer. She would not tell anyone. But she was there, and that was enough. Megan Hollis was there. The aide who had recorded the video. She had been fired from her position at the city council the day after the upload. She had expected that. She had also expected regret, some moment of second-guessing some night when she lay awake wondering if she had done the right thing. The moment never came. She had found a new job at a nonprofit that advocated for homeless youth. The pay was less. The hours were longer. She had never been happier. Evelyn sat in the front row. She was crying again, but the tears were different now. These were not the tears of 23 years of grief breaking through a wall. These were the tears of someone watching something beautiful unfold and allowing herself to feel it without reservation, without guilt, without the voice that had spent 2 decades whispering that she did not deserve happiness because her son was not alive to share it. When the judge asked Marcus if he accepted Dean Braddock as his father and Lily Braddock as his sister, he said yes without hesitation. Because for the first time in 5 years, the word family did not feel like something that had been taken away. It felt like something that had been given back. The clubhouse meeting happened 3 days after the adoption. The main hall of the Desert Iron Motorcycle Club headquarters sat in a converted warehouse on the south side of Phoenix cinder block walls, an exposed ductwork, and a floor that had absorbed 30 years of boot prints and engine oil. The entire Arizona chapter assembled, 217 members seated in rows of folding chairs. The room smelled like leather and the particular kind of solidarity that exists between people who have been dismissed by the world and have decided to build their own world instead. Dean stood at the front, Marcus beside him. The boy was wearing the clothes Dean had bought him the week before. Jeans that fit, boots that were not held together with tape, a flannel shirt that still smelled new. He looked different from the boy who had crawled out of the ground 2 months earlier. He had gained weight. His eyes were clearer. The permanent hunch of his shoulders, the defensive posture of a child who had spent 2 years making himself invisible, was beginning to straighten. But he was nervous. He could face dark tunnels and rising water. He could crawl 2 miles on bleeding hands. Standing in front of 200 people who were looking at him like he mattered was harder than any of that. Brothers and sisters, Dean said, his voice carrying across the room with the authority of 15 years of leadership. You know why we are here. You know what this boy did. You know the debt we owe him. In this club, we have a saying, family is not blood. Family is who shows up. And this boy showed up when no one else did. He crawled through 2 miles of darkness to save a little girl he had never met. He held her above the water when the flood came. He did not give up. He did not let go. He turned to the assembled riders. Should Marcus Webb be accepted into this club as family? Every hand raised, every voice saying yes. 217 people who understood better than most what it meant to be written off by the world and to show up anyway. Dean placed a leather vest on Marcus's shoulders, child-sized, custom-made, the patches marking him as family, as protected, as belonging. Welcome home, brother. Marcus stood in the middle of 217 people who were cheering for him, and for the first time in 2 years, he let himself cry. Not from sadness, not from fear, from the staggering, overwhelming realization that he was no longer alone. The legislation that followed came to be known as the HOPE Act. It was signed into law by the Arizona governor 4 months after the rescue in a ceremony held on the steps of the state capitol building, with Marcus and Lily and Dean and Evelyn standing beside the governor as he put pen to paper. The bill mandated quarterly inspections of all urban drainage infrastructure across the state. It required immediate public disclosure of any hazards discovered near schools, parks, or residential areas. It created a streamlined emergency authorization process that allowed fire departments to deploy heavy equipment in life-threatening situations without waiting for council approval. It established a dedicated emergency response fund financed by a reallocation of municipal infrastructure budgets that could be accessed within minutes rather than hours. And it created a statewide database of vulnerable infrastructure points maintained by an independent oversight board that could not be buried or ignored the way the 2012 engineering report had been. No more waiting for paperwork while children drowned. No more weighing budgets against breathing. No more filing cabinets in basement offices where warnings went to die. The bill's official name was the Arizona Infrastructure Safety and Emergency Response Act, but everyone called it what it was: Lily's Law. Evelyn was named to the oversight board. She accepted the position without hesitation. She told a reporter who asked why the closest she had ever come to being able to protect children the way she had always wanted to protect them. Not from behind a headset, not from a cubicle 4 miles away, but from the inside of the system that had failed them, from a seat at the table where the decisions were made. She still worked the night shift at the dispatch center, still answered calls, still kept her headset on for 8 hours at a stretch, her voice steady, her hands sure on the keyboard. But the photograph on her desk was face up now. And sometimes between calls, she would look at Nolan's gap-toothed smile and feel something that was not grief and not guilt, but something gentler. Something that felt like companionship. Like he was sitting beside her in the cubicle, watching her work, proud of the person she was becoming. 5 years passed. Marcus Webb was 16 years old. He stood on the stage of the Phoenix Convention Center, looking out at 3,000 people who had come to hear him speak. The Hope Initiative annual gala, the charity he had helped create, had become the largest fundraising event in the state. This year's theme was Voices from Underground, the program that Marcus had built with Evelyn and Dean and a growing army of volunteers who believed that no child should ever be lost in the dark. He cleared his throat. The room went quiet. 3,000 people in formal wear, holding glasses of champagne and programs printed on heavy paper, all of them turning toward the stage where a 16-year-old boy in a borrowed suit was about to tell them a story they already knew. But knowing the story and hearing it from the person who lived it were two different things. And Marcus Webb had learned over 5 years of telling this story that the telling never got easier. It just got more necessary. 5 years ago, he said, I was sleeping under a bridge. I had been on the streets for 2 years. I had no family, no friends, no reason to believe that anyone cared whether I lived or died. I was 11 years old and I had already given up on the idea that the world would ever notice I existed. He paused. Let the silence hold. He had learned that from Evelyn. The power of silence. The way it makes the words that follow land harder. And then I heard a sound. A little girl crying in the darkness. A 4-year-old named Lily who had fallen into a place where no one was looking for her. A place the city had forgotten about. A place where the maintenance reports said everything was fine because it was easier to sign a piece of paper than to climb underground and check. The audience was silent. 3,000 people holding their breath. I could have walked away. Most people would have. Most people would have convinced themselves that someone else would handle it. Someone with training, someone with equipment, someone whose job it was to save children from storm drains. But I knew something that most people do not know. I knew that sometimes help does not come. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes the only person who can save you is the one who happens to hear you crying. He touched his chest. The copper token still hung there on the same cord, worn even smoother by 5 more years of touching. The engraved words invisible to anyone who did not know they were there. But Marcus knew. He always knew. My mother gave me this token before she died. She told me she would return. She did not. But her promise did. It returned through every person who showed up that night. Through Evelyn, who stayed on the line. Through my father, who dug with his bare hands. Through 200 strangers who became family. He looked at the audience. 87 dangerous manholes have been covered since that night. 12 children have been found using the protocols we developed. The Hope Initiative has trained over 500 volunteers to recognize the signs of homeless youth in crisis. But the numbers are not the point. The point is this. Every one of us has the power to be the voice that someone hears in the darkness. Every one of us can choose to show up when showing up is hard. Every one of us can decide that the person crying for help is worth saving, even when the system says they are not a priority. He paused. My mother ran into a burning building to save strangers. She did not come back. For a long time, I was angry about that. I thought she had chosen other people over me. But now I understand. She did not leave me. She returned through me when I climbed into that tunnel. She returned through every person who has ever chosen courage over comfort. She returned through you by being here tonight, by caring about children who have no one else to care about them. He looked at the front row. Evelyn sat beside Dean and Lily, all 3 of them crying openly. Lily, now 9 years old, wearing a dress she had picked out herself, holding a sign she had made from poster board and markers that read, "My brother is a hero. So here is my promise to you. I will keep returning. I will keep showing up. I will keep being the voice that someone hears in the darkness. And I hope you will do the same." The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Later that night, after the gala had ended and the guests had gone and the convention center had emptied into the warm October evening, Evelyn Mercer drove to Greenwood Memory Lawn Cemetery. She took the long way. Down 19th Avenue, past the spot where the storm grate still sat in the sidewalk, now marked with a small bronze plaque that the city had installed 3 years ago. Past the overpass where Marcus had slept, now the site of a youth outreach center funded by the Hope Initiative. Past the fire station where Rollins had made his choice and Reeves had refused to give up, and the fire captain, whose name Evelyn had never learned, had pointed where to dig and saved his conscience along with 2 children. The city looked different at night, softer. The hard edges blurred by darkness, the ugly parts hidden, the beautiful parts lit up. Evelyn had spent 23 years seeing Phoenix only at night, only from behind the windshield of her car, driving to and from shifts only through the lens of emergencies that happened when the sun was down. But tonight the city felt different. Tonight it felt like a place where things could be rebuilt, where broken pieces could be assembled into something new, where the tunnels beneath the surface, the ones that carried water and waste, and the forgotten debris of a million lives could also carry something else. A voice, a cry for help, a sound that someone would hear. She had not been to the cemetery in years, had avoided this place with its manicured grass and its rows of quiet stones because coming here meant admitting something she had spent 23 years refusing to admit, that Nolan was gone, that he was not coming back, that no amount of answered calls or saved children or sleepless nights would ever fill the space he had left behind. But something had changed. Something had. Something that had started on a night in August when a boy called her from the dark and said three words that cracked the wall she had built around her heart. Something that had grown in the 5 years since, slowly and steadily, the way grass grows over bare ground, the way light creeps into rooms that have been closed for a long time. She walked through the rows of headstones until she found the small one near the back. Nolan James Mercer, beloved son forever 6. She knelt in the grass and placed her hand on the cold stone. The night was warm. The sky was clear. Stars scattered across the darkness like scattered light, like promises thrown into the void by someone who believed they would land somewhere that mattered. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "It has been a while." The wind moved through the trees. A car passed on the road beyond the cemetery wall, its headlights sweeping across the grass before disappearing. "I want you to know something. I finally stopped blaming myself. Not because what happened was not terrible, it was. It always will be. But because I realized that carrying that guilt was not honoring you. It was just hurting me, and you would not have wanted that. You were 6 years old, and you were kinder than most adults I have ever met. You would have told me to stop being sad. You would have told me to go help someone. That is what you would have said." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a copper token identical to the one Marcus wore. She had had it made after the rescue, two words engraved on its surface. "I'll return. There is a boy named Marcus," she said. "You would have liked him. He is brave and kind and stubborn in all the best ways. He saved a little girl from the same thing that took you, and in doing that, he saved me too." She placed the token at the base of the headstone. It caught the moonlight, the engraved words visible for a moment before the light shifted and they disappeared into shadow. "I hear you now, Nolan. Not your voice exactly, but something, a feeling, a presence. Like you are still with me even though you are not. Like you have been with me all along in every call I answered, in every child I helped, in every moment I chose to stay on the line instead of hanging up." She smiled, and for the first time in 28 years, the smile reached her eyes. "I'm going to keep doing this work, keep answering calls, keep being there for the children who need someone to listen. Because that is what you would have wanted. That is who you would have been if you had gotten the chance to grow up." She stood, brushed the grass from her knees, looked at the headstone one last time. The copper token gleamed at its base, catching the light from a street lamp at the cemetery entrance. Two words that had traveled from a mother's hand to a boy's chest to the base of a headstone in a cemetery in Phoenix, Arizona. Two words that had meant one thing when they were engraved and had come to mean something larger, something that no one could have predicted, something that encompassed not just the return of a single person, but the return of faith and courage and the stubborn, irrational, magnificent human insistence on showing up for each other even when showing up costs everything. "I love you, baby," Evelyn said. "I will see you again someday, but not yet. I have too much work to do." She turned and walked away, her footsteps steady on the grass, her shoulders straight, her face lifted toward a sky that was full of stars and silence, and the kind of peace that comes not from the absence of pain, but from the decision to carry it forward instead of letting it hold you back. The drive home was quiet, the streets were empty, the city was sleeping. But beneath its surface, 600 miles of tunnels carried water, and silence, and the memory of a night when everything could have ended differently, but did not. Because a boy heard a sound and went toward it instead of away from it. Because a woman on the other end of a phone chose to stay on the line. Because a father and 200 strangers decided that procedure was less important than love. Because a 4-year-old girl named Lily had the courage to keep singing in the dark until someone heard her. Behind her at the cemetery, the morning sun was still hours away, but the first light was already there, hidden below the horizon, waiting to rise. The copper token glinted in the moonlight, its engraved words facing the sky. "I'll return," a promise made by a mother who could not keep it, kept by a boy who crawled through the dark, honored by a woman who finally learned to listen to the voice she had been carrying inside her for 23 years. A promise that echoed through the tunnels beneath Phoenix, through the lives that had been saved, through the community that had been built on the foundation of one little girl's cry in the darkness. "I can hear her," three words that changed everything.